Breaking the shell, finding your way out of silence. Introduction. The world vibrates with an incessant thrum. Cars hurtle past, phones chirp with urgent notifications, conversations eddy and flow. Yet, amidst this cacophony, a profound quiet can descend within us. It is a silence that offers no solace, but instead presses down, a palpable weight woven from unspoken words and unarticulated sentiments. Have you ever experienced the burden of things left unsaid, of emotions that seem to burrow deep, too timid to surface? It is as if an invisible partition separates you from the world, a pane of glass through which you observe life, yet cannot truly grasp it. This barrier is not forged of stone or steel. Its architecture is far more intricate, constructed from our own internal defenses. This is the genesis of the emotional shell. Envision it as an invisible bulwark, meticulously erected over time. It begins subtly, perhaps as a shield against the sting of past hurts or a camouflage to blend in when we felt alien. These shells are our unconscious pronouncements. I must safeguard myself from this world, from its judgments, from its overwhelming tides of feeling. They manifest as the facile jest that deflects a serious inquiry, the stoic mask worn when the spirit threatens to fracture, or the primal urge to withdraw and shut down when intensity mounts. For a time, they fulfill their intended function. They keep us safe. They facilitate survival. However, herein lies the paradox. The very mechanisms we fashion for protection can, with the passage of years, become instruments of our own confinement. That shield, designed to repel harm, inadvertently bars entry to all else: joy, love, connection, growth. The emotional shell, once a sanctuary, transforms into a silent prison. It muffles our authentic voice, rendering it arduous to articulate our true selves and our deepest feelings. It is akin to inhabiting a sumptuously appointed chamber, its door locked from within, the key long since misplaced. The toll exacted by dwelling within these shells is considerable. Our relationships falter. Genuine intimacy necessitates vulnerability, the courage to reveal our unvarnished selves, imperfections and all. But when our shells are too formidable, we deny others the opportunity for true acquaintance and ourselves the profound solace of being seen and embraced. This can precipitate annoying solitude, even when surrounded by company. The repercussions extend inward as well. The energy expended in maintaining these fortifications is energy diverted from the vibrant act of living. Suppressed emotions do not vanish. They accumulate, fostering an internal pressure that may manifest as anxiety, stress, or a pervasive sense of malaise. Our creativity may wane, our passions dwindle, and the vivid hues of existence may appear muted. We may even find ourselves adrift, uncertain of our identity beneath these protective strata. It is as if our authentic essence, a nascent seedling, struggles to unfurl beneath an oppressive weight. A profound sense of inertia can take hold when we confront the duration of our sojourn behind these defenses. Perhaps it has been years, even decades. Some individuals discover themselves bound by these fortifications for as long as 52 years. The prospect of dismantling such a deeply entrenched structure can seem daunting, even insurmountable. Yet, here resides a vital truth, the promise that underpins this entire endeavor: these shells, irrespective of their tenure, are not immutable. They were constructed by us, and with burgeoning awareness and the requisite instruments, they can be comprehended and gently dismantled. This book, Breaking the Shell, Finding Your Way Out of Silence, emerges from the profound recognition that while these protective barriers are commonplace, they are not our destiny. It asserts that within each of us resides the innate capacity for authentic expression and genuine transformation, and that discernible pathways exist to reclaim this inherent freedom. This is not an exhortation to eradicate emotion or to embrace an unbridled exposure. Rather, it is an invitation to navigate our internal landscapes with fortitude and grace, to articulate our truths in ways that cultivate connection rather than isolation. It is the journey from silence into the rich, resonant tapestry of our own voice. This book stands as your invitation, your guide, and your steadfast companion on this transformative expedition. Chapter 1. Understanding the Silence. 1. What is emotional expression? Emotions serve as a profound language spoken by both body and mind, offering insights into our experiences, our fundamental needs, and our intricate connections to the world. Emotional expression, in its purest form, is the deliberate act of allowing this internal dialogue to become audible and visible. It transcends the simplistic notions of anger's roar or sorrow's cry, though these are certainly components. Instead, it is a far more expansive, nuanced, and inherently human process. Imagine it as a dynamic river. At times, it surges with impetuous force, and at others, it glides with gentle grace, yet it is perpetually in motion, a constant testament to its presence. This expression manifests in a myriad of ways. A fleeting smile can convey the warmth of happiness, a knitted brow might signal a moment of confusion, or a sigh can eloquently articulate weariness. It is present in the very carriage of our shoulders, perhaps held back with unwavering confidence, or slumped in the quiet resignation of defeat. The timbre of our voice, whether it resonates with inviting warmth or sharp detachment, is a potent vehicle. Beyond these immediate corporeal signals, emotional expression is deeply embedded in our actions. It is the solace we extend to a hurting friend, the fervent energy we channel into a creative endeavor that ignites our spirit, or even the quiet courage it takes to share a personal narrative with a trusted confidant. Each of these acts represents a translation of our internal landscape into a form that can be apprehended by others, and crucially by ourselves. At its very core, genuine emotional expression is a testament to honesty. It is the seamless bridge connecting our internal sensations with our external presentation. It is the moment our inner world finds harmonious accord with our outer reality. This stands in stark contrast to merely experiencing an emotion. One may be swept by a wave of sadness, yet if this feeling remains entirely sequestered, if it finds no outward manifestation, it becomes a prisoner within. It is also distinct from the pretense of emotion. We might, for expediency or social acceptance, adopt a demeanor that does not reflect our true feelings, akin to donning a mask that obscures the genuine self. Authentic expression, conversely, is about unvarnished reality. It is the courageous allowance of our true feelings to be perceived and acknowledged, even when those feelings are arduous, discomforting, or unlikely to elicit universal approval. It is precisely this authenticity that the emotional shells we construct labor so assiduously to conceal. The imperative for emotional expression is as fundamental to our psychological vitality as sustenance is to our physical being. When we deny this innate human requirement, when we confine our emotions within, we are akin to attempting to stem an overwhelming tide. Inevitably, the pressure escalates. This suppression does not eradicate the emotions, it merely compels them to seek alternative, and often detrimental, channels of egress. Consider this: if frustration cannot be articulated openly, it may transmute into anxiety or perhaps manifest as a pervasive low-grade irritation that infiltrates every interaction. It can even manifest somatically, giving rise to headaches, gastrointestinal distress, or chronic fatigue. This internal cacophony is the sound of unvoiced feelings desperately seeking recognition. It is the ceaseless murmur of emotions that have been relegated to the depths, yearning for any fissure or opening to escape. Societal expectations exert a profound influence on our perception and practice of emotional expression. From our earliest years, we are often indoctrinated into what constitutes acceptable emotional comportment. We absorb messages such as "boys don't cry" or "be a good girl" and "don't make a fuss." These well-intentioned, yet frequently damaging, directives can instill the belief that certain emotions are inherently wrong or indicative of weakness, and that their outward display will invite censure or disapproval. This can foster an internalized silence, a habitual restraint of our genuine feelings, born from the learned conviction that such reticence offers greater safety. We begin to internalize the notion that acceptance is contingent upon presenting a facade of composure, control, or even emotional detachment. This marks the nascent stage of constructing those protective ramparts, the emotional shells, which we shall explore in greater detail. Upon closer examination, the subtle indicators of genuine emotional expression are discernible all around us, and indeed, within ourselves. These are not the ostentatious displays often depicted in cinematic narratives. Rather, they are the minute, almost imperceptible shifts that betray our inner state. A subtle inclination of the head may signify curiosity, a softening of the eyes can convey empathy, or an involuntary tightening of the jaw might betray suppressed anger. These are distinct from superficial or performative gestures that can be mistaken for authenticity. A forced smile that fails to reach the eyes, a dramatic sigh intended to solicit attention, or a perfunctory apology, devoid of genuine contrition, these are but echoes of emotion, not its substance. True expression possesses an inherent gravity, a verity that resonates even in its most understated forms. It is the divergence between a meticulously rendered painting and a spontaneous sketch that captures the raw essence of a fleeting moment. The potent force of genuine emotional expression lies in its capacity to forge connections. When we allow ourselves the vulnerability of revealing our true feelings, we create an opening for others to engage with us on a more profound level. It is in these shared moments of emotional resonance, whether of elation or desolation, that we truly feel perceived and understood. This is precisely what the emotional shells impede. They are designed to shield us from the perceived sting of judgment or rejection. But in doing so, they also obstruct the potential for authentic connection and intimacy. They erect a barrier, not only between ourselves and others, but also between our present selves and the deeper, more genuine facets of our being. The emotional shell serves as a metaphor for the protective fortifications we erect around ourselves. Consider the analogy of a turtle retracting its head and limbs into its shell when sensing peril, a primal defense mechanism. We engage in a similar process with our emotions. Past experiences may have taught us that the overt expression of feelings can lead to hurt, criticism, or overwhelm. Consequently, over time, we unconsciously develop methods to shield our inner core. These shells are forged through our lived experiences and can become so deeply ingrained, so integral to our identity, that their presence goes unnoticed. They are constructed to safeguard us from perceived harm, judgment, or overwhelming emotional tides. Initially, these shells fulfill a vital function. They equip us to navigate challenging circumstances and protect our vulnerable inner essence. However, the difficulty arises when these shells solidify, becoming so immutable that they begin to constrict us. They transform from protective shields into confining prisons. They can impede our ability to articulate our true feelings, to cultivate genuine connections with others, and to foster personal growth. We may find ourselves adrift in a sea of confusion, isolation, or a disquieting sense of incompleteness. It is akin to inhabiting a magnificent dwelling with all its windows boarded shut. While offering a semblance of security, it denies us the prospect of beholding the world beyond, nor does it allow the world to perceive us. The remarkable truth about these emotional shells is that, irrespective of their duration, whether they have been cultivated over a few years or, as some may perceive, an entire lifetime, they are not immutable. They do not represent an unalterable aspect of our identity. They are, in essence, learned behaviors, protective patterns that, with conscious awareness and appropriate strategies, can be dismantled. This book is dedicated to uncovering those methods, to identifying the pathway out of the silence that these shells impose, and to reclaiming the liberation of emotional expression and authentic connection. It is about carefully fracturing the shell not to expose ourselves to gratuitous harm, but to grant the vibrant, authentic self within the space to finally inhale and flourish. The noise of suppressed emotion is a critical element in this discourse. When we force our feelings downward, they do not simply dissipate. They linger, much like static on a radio signal, disrupting clear communication. This internal static can manifest in a multitude of ways. It may present as a perpetual state of heightened tension, an inability to fully relax, or an incessant apprehension that impending misfortune is inevitable. It can also surface as irritability, leading to outbursts directed at loved ones over trivial matters, or a pervasive sense of discontent that defies precise identification. At times, this suppressed emotional energy can even manifest physically, contributing to headaches, muscular rigidity, or digestive disturbances. Our bodies are exquisitely sensitive instruments, and they frequently bear the brunt of our emotional containment. This is the internal noise engendered by the silence of the shell. It is the clamor of emotion seeking an outlet, a desperate entreaty from our inner selves for acknowledgement and processing. Consider the case of Sarah, a woman in her late 40s who sought my counsel. For the majority of her life, Sarah had been the unwavering pillar of strength. Tears were a rarity, even at somber occasions. When distressed, her standard response was, "I'm fine," followed by a swift change of subject. Her mother's constant refrain was, "Don't be a bother, just get on with it." Consequently, Sarah internalized this directive. She constructed an formidable emotional shell. Her professional life was a testament to her success. She was a devoted mother and a steadfast friend. Externally, she appeared to have life perfectly managed. Yet, internally, she experienced a persistent, low-grade thrum of anxiety. She grappled with insomnia, her shoulders remained perpetually tense, and she often felt a vague sense of isolation, even when surrounded by others. She struggled to pinpoint the source of this malaise, sensing only a profound lack. This was the noise of her unexpressed emotions, the static interference of years of suppressed feelings desperately seeking an avenue of escape. Her shell, while effectively shielding her from the perceived vulnerability associated with sadness or fear, had simultaneously severed her from the richness of genuine emotional connection and self-understanding. The subtle, non-verbal cues that signify authentic emotional expression are frequently overlooked because our ingrained habit is to seek out the obvious. A genuine expression of joy is not merely a smile, it is a smile that illuminates the eyes, etching fine lines at their corners. It is accompanied by a lightness in one's bearing, an open and relaxed posture. When someone is truly sorrowful, it is not simply the presence of tears, it is the slump of the shoulders, a downcast gaze, a voice that may tremble faintly. These are not deliberate performances. They are involuntary responses that emanate from a profound inner state. They are, in a word, authentic. Conversely, performative gestures are learned behaviors. They are often characterized by exaggeration or incompleteness. Consider someone who utters "I'm sorry" with a dismissive shrug and a fleeting glance away. The words are present, but the emotional resonance, the genuine regret or understanding, is conspicuously absent. This is akin to a beautifully adorned gift box containing nothing within. It possesses visual appeal but lacks substance. These performative actions are frequently adopted because we internalize the belief that they are what others expect. We learn to mimic the outward manifestations of emotion without necessarily experiencing the emotion itself. This represents a sophisticated defense mechanism, wherein the shell not only conceals the raw emotion, but also crafts a convincing imitation to deflect scrutiny. It is an intricate dance of appearing to express without truly revealing. The fundamental essence of emotional expression, therefore, lies in its authenticity. It is the congruence between our internal experience and our outward communication. When this alignment is present, we experience a profound sense of wholeness and integrity. We feel more present in our own lives and more deeply connected to others. This is precisely what the emotional shell obstructs. It functions as a filter, or even an impenetrable wall, that distorts or completely severs the genuine expression of our inner world. It is a defense mechanism that, while initially beneficial, can ultimately lead to a pervasive sense of disconnect and isolation. Comprehending what constitutes true emotional expression and recognizing its profound importance is the initial step toward discerning how our shells might be limiting us and embarking on the journey toward liberation. The subsequent, pivotal step involves understanding the intricate architecture of these defensive structures. If emotional expression is the lifeblood of our inner existence, then the emotional shell is the edifice that can impede that vital flow. We must meticulously examine how these shells are constructed, the materials from which they are fashioned, and the specific mechanisms through which they prevent our authentic selves from being perceived and heard. This comprehension forms the bedrock upon which we can discover our way out of silence and reclaim our emotional freedom. 2. The cost of emotional suppression. The primordial urge to self-preservation, a potent and deeply etched human characteristic, compels us to seek refuge when the world feels unduly sharp, overwhelmingly vast, or relentlessly judgmental. This innate impulse is the genesis of the emotional carapace, a layered defense akin to protective armor, often forged without our conscious awareness. We learn to bridle sharp retorts, to swallow the bitter draught of disappointment, to affix a smile when our hearts are fractured. This appears a sagacious, indispensable stratagem for navigating the perilous currents of existence, a means to traverse life's terrain with minimal abrasion. But what if this very bulwark, conceived for our safety, becomes our prison? What if the silence we cultivate to evade pain also stifles our most authentic selves, exacting a toll far exceeding our initial estimations? Consider this: when a potent emotion surges within, perhaps a flash of ire, a tide of melancholy, or a tremor of apprehension, and you consciously choose to quell it, to deny its outward manifestation, what transpires internally? The feeling does not simply evaporate. Rather, it is akin to attempting to submerge a beach ball beneath the water's surface. While containment is possible for a time, it demands an extraordinary expenditure of energy. Muscles tense, respiration may shallow, and an insidious, persistent pressure mounts within. This is the immediate, visceral sensation of suppression. It is the clenching of the jaw, the constriction in the chest, the frantic internal monologue urging self-restraint. Calm down. Don't react. Be normal. The initial impulse, raw and unvarnished, is met by a force of will, a deliberate act of containment. This exertion, this unceasing vigilance, does not dissipate into the ether. It is energy diverted, energy that could have been channeled into countless other pursuits, now dedicated to perpetuating an illusion of inner tranquility. This marks the nascent cost, the deceptive veneer of control juxtaposed against the reality of internal disarray. In its nascent stages, the shell might bestow a semblance of mastery. You perceive yourself as managing, as coping. Yet, with each act of suppression, the internal pressure intensifies. It is akin to constructing a pressure cooker. The steam, though contained, continues to build, seeking an egress. This perpetual internal tension, this unacknowledged emotional energy, does not lie dormant. It begins to permeate every facet of your existence, manifesting as a low-grade anxiety that hums beneath the surface, a chronic stress that leaves you perpetually on edge, or even physical discomforts that elude medical explanation. The energy expended in holding back does not vanish. It transmutes, often into something less salutary, something that drains rather than empowers. The outward composure becomes a meticulously constructed facade, masking an inner tempest that rages in silence, rendering genuine repose and serenity elusive. This internal turbulence inevitably encroaches upon our relationships, corroding the very connections we often erect our shells to safeguard. When we consistently conceal our true feelings, we erect a subtle yet profound chasm between ourselves and others. Reflect upon it. If an individual perpetually presents a neutral countenance, a polite smile, or an unruffled demeanor, even when life presents formidable challenges, how does this strike you as an observer? It can evoke a sense of their absence, or perhaps a perception that they harbor insufficient trust to reveal their authentic selves. Even if others cannot articulate precisely what you are concealing, they can discern the absence of genuine emotional expression. They may interpret it as coldness, aloofness, or a deficit of sincerity. This fosters a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being unseen and misunderstood, even amidst company. The silence of unexpressed emotions becomes an impenetrable barrier, impeding the flourishing of genuine intimacy. We may accumulate a multitude of acquaintances, engage in numerous superficial exchanges, yet the profound, soul-sustaining connections born of vulnerability and mutual understanding remain beyond our grasp. This transcends mere social awkwardness. It speaks to the fundamental human need to be known and accepted, a need that cannot be met when our true selves are sequestered behind a meticulously maintained shell. Furthermore, the persistent act of suppressing emotions exerts a peculiar influence on our capacity for both joy and resilience. Our emotional landscape is not a collection of isolated islands. It is an interconnected ecosystem. The ability to experience the full spectrum of human emotion is intrinsically linked. When we construct fortifications to ward off difficult emotions, sadness, anger, fear, we inadvertently erect them around our capacity for joy and wonder as well. It is akin to attempting to dam a flood. The dam effectively impedes the destructive force of the rising waters, but it also obstructs the river's natural flow, denying nourishment to the lands downstream. Similarly, by suppressing negative emotions, we numb ourselves to the richness and vibrancy of positive ones. Life can begin to feel muted, less vivid, as if viewing a film in monochrome. The peaks are less exhilarating and simple pleasures lose their effervescence. Moreover, this emotional dampening renders us less equipped to confront future adversities. Resilience is not the absence of falls, it is the capacity to rise again. And the ability to rise is deeply intertwined with our capacity to process difficult emotions. When we have not acquired the skills to navigate sadness, disappointment, or even grief, a new setback can feel catastrophic. We lack the internal wherewithal and the emotional agility to adapt and recover. Conversely, those who can acknowledge and process challenging feelings, even when it induces discomfort, cultivate a more robust inner core. They learn that they can endure pain, that emotions are transient, and that they possess the capacity for healing. Through suppression, we deprive ourselves of this vital training ground, leaving us more susceptible to fragility and less able to rebound when life inevitably delivers its blows. Perhaps one of the most significant, yet frequently overlooked, costs of emotional suppression is the stunting of our personal growth and self-awareness. Our emotions are not capricious occurrences. They are invaluable signals, akin to a sophisticated internal navigation system. They apprise us of our needs, our values, what is functioning effectively in our lives and what is not. When we experience anger, it may signal that a boundary has been transgressed. A pang of jealousy might point to an unacknowledged desire. Fear can serve as a warning, or sometimes, as an indicator that we are on the precipice of something significant. By suppressing these signals, we effectively choose to disregard the wisdom our bodies and hearts endeavor to impart. This leads to a stagnation of personal development. We may find ourselves ensnared in cycles of behavior, repeating similar errors, because the underlying emotional drivers are never brought into the light. True self-awareness transcends mere recognition of one's strengths and weaknesses. It encompasses the acknowledgement and comprehension of the entire spectrum of our inner experience, including those aspects that feel uncomfortable, chaotic, or inconvenient. When we acknowledge only the acceptable emotions, we foster a fragmented sense of self. We do not truly know ourselves because we are actively concealing significant portions of our own being. This deficit in profound self-understanding can engender a pervasive sensation of being adrift, of lacking clarity regarding our identity or our deepest desires. The shell, conceived for protection, ultimately obscures the very self it was intended to shield. Beyond the psychological and relational toll, there exists a tangible physical price for unexpressed emotion. Our bodies are remarkably attuned to our emotional states, and chronic emotional suppression can manifest in concrete ways. The persistent internal tension and stress associated with inhibiting feelings take a toll on our physiological systems. Consider the physical sensations associated with stress: headaches, muscle tension, digestive disturbances, a compromised immune system. These are not arbitrary ailments. They can be the body's means of signaling an imbalance. The mind and body are inextricably linked, and when we deny our emotions, our bodies often bear the brunt of that denial. The energy being contained internally can contribute to inflammation, disrupt hormonal equilibrium, and generally erode our physical resilience. While an exhaustive exploration of the physiological ramifications may be deferred, it is imperative to recognize that the emotional shell is not merely a psychological construct. It exerts a profound and tangible impact on our well-being. The cumulative weight of these costs, the internal disarray that masquerades as control, the fractured connections that foster isolation, the muted experience of life that diminishes our capacity for joy, the stunted growth that impedes our fullest potential, and the very real physical toll on our bodies, can feel immense. It is a formidable burden to bear, one that many of us have unknowingly carried for years, perhaps even decades. We have become so accustomed to the silence, so adept at maintaining the shell, that we may fail to recognize the true price we are paying. Yet, comprehending these consequences is the essential first step. For just as we learn to construct these shells, we can also learn to recognize their true cost, and in doing so, begin to perceive the possibility of an alternative path, a path that does not necessitate the sacrifice of our authentic selves for a precarious sense of security. 3. Recognizing your personal shells. We often mistake our silence for a bulwark of strength, a stoic resilience that allows us to navigate life's tempests without a ripple. It can become a banner we proudly unfurl, a testament to our self-command or our composure when others falter. Yet, what if this quietude is not an emblem of inner fortitude, but rather a meticulously crafted citadel, erected stone by stone over years of perceived threats and unspoken grievances? What if it is an emotional shell, a protective carapace that, having once served a vital purpose, has now become a gilded cage, barring not only perceived dangers but also the very richness of existence? This excavation into the heart of silence commences with the audacious act of recognition. It demands we peer beyond the superficial, to discern the intricate scaffolding of defenses we have erected around our most tender selves. An emotional shell, as we have come to apprehend it, is not an inherent flaw etched into our being from inception. It is a learned stratagem, a sophisticated survival mechanism that coalesces over time, often beneath the radar of conscious awareness. Envision a child who learns that displays of sorrow elicit dismissal or censure. To shield themselves from further wounding, they might begin to suppress their tears, to don a mask of bravery, to retreat into quietude. This is not a deliberate choice to become unfeeling. It is an adaptive maneuver, a means of navigating a world that felt too perilous for the authentic expression of emotion. Over the passage of years, these acquired behaviors become deeply embedded. The initial imperative for protection may recede, but the habit of erecting ramparts persists. This is the fate of one who, as they recounted, spent 52 years constructing their shell. Consider this. More than half a century, each perceived slight, each moment of felt vulnerability, each tremor of fear regarding judgment or rejection, has contributed another stratum to that protective casing. It was not fashioned in a single day, but rather accumulated through countless infinitesimal moments, each one reinforcing the conviction that openness, true visibility, was an untenable risk. This accretion can leave us adrift, strangers within our own skin, bewildered by our reactions and the persistent elusiveness of genuine connection. These shells, however, seldom announce themselves as overt acts of withdrawal. While some may exhibit extreme stoicism or an absolute aversion to conflict, their manifestations are frequently far more insidious, weaving themselves into the very fabric of our daily lives with a subtlety that often escapes our notice. They can masquerade as virtues, rendering them all the more elusive. Contemplate the individual perpetually occupied, ceaselessly in motion, their every moment filled with activity. This is not invariably a sign of ambition. It can be a tactic to evade introspection, to keep the mind so thoroughly engaged that no space remains for the surfacing of discomforting feelings or memories. Then there is the perfectionist, who pursues flawlessness with unyielding dedication. While diligence is commendable, perfectionism often springs from a profound dread of criticism or failure. The shell here is forged from the relentless pursuit of an unattainable standard, ensuring that any potential judgment is preempted by an impeccable performance. Similarly, excessive people-pleasing can constitute a shell, a strategy to secure approval and circumvent the perceived threat of rejection. If everyone likes you, no one can hurt you, can they? This can lead to a life lived in service to others, where personal needs and desires are systematically subjugated. Sarcasm and cynicism, too, can serve as formidable bulwarks. A barbed remark or a dismissive air can maintain a distance, preventing others from drawing near enough to perceive that vulnerability beneath. It is a declaration: I am not taking this seriously, and I am certainly not taking you seriously, effectively repelling any genuine emotional engagement. Intellectualization also functions as a potent barrier. By fixating solely on facts, logic, and abstract concepts, one can detach from the untamed, unpredictable realm of emotions. It is akin to observing a tempest from behind thick, soundproof glass. One can witness it, analyze it, but remain untouched by its raw power. The initial episode described in the transcript, the sudden scream followed by a demand for silence, offers a poignant window into the nature of these shells. That scream, however disquieting, was a momentary fissure, a brief rupture in the carefully constructed fortifications. It was the suppressed emotion, the accumulated hurt, finding a desperate, if ephemeral, egress. The immediate imperative for silence that follows is a testament to the alacrity with which we attempt to mend that breach, how instinctively we retreat to the familiar solace of our protective walls, even when that solace is isolating. The ensuing confusion after such a crack is understandable. It is the disorientation of being briefly exposed to a world from which one has spent decades shielding oneself. The toll exacted by this protection, however, is profound. While our shells may deflect perceived threats, they simultaneously erect barriers to the very elements that imbue life with meaning. Authentic connection, the kind that sustains the spirit, necessitates vulnerability. It demands that we permit others to witness our imperfect, unkempt, beautiful selves, and that we, in turn, are willing to behold theirs. A shell, by its very definition, excludes others. It obstructs the profound intimacy that blossoms from shared laughter, tears, and mutual comprehension. It can engender a gnawing sense of solitude, a feeling of being alone even amidst a throng, because the true self remains concealed, inaccessible. Furthermore, these shells constrict our capacity for unadulterated joy. True elation often arises from spontaneous expression, from the liberation to be whimsical, to be passionate, to be vibrantly alive. When we are perpetually self-monitoring, policing our emotions, and adhering to rigid internal decrees, spontaneity becomes a distant echo. Our creativity, too, can languish. Ideas that might be unconventional, or that challenge our established paradigms, can be swiftly quashed by the protective mechanism deemed too perilous or too disruptive to the meticulously maintained equilibrium. Identifying your personal shells is an act of investigative sleuthing, an exploration of your inner topography. It entails heeding not the strident pronouncements of your intellect, but the subtle murmurs, the persistent anxieties, and the predictable cadences of your behavior. It is about assuming the role of an observer of your own internal discourse. What are the incessant shoulds and should nots that reverberate in your thoughts? What circumstances reliably provoke a defensive stance, a tightening in your chest, or an impulse to withdraw. What underlying fears might be orchestrating these responses? For instance, if you find yourself consistently sidestepping arduous conversations, inquire, what is the direst outcome I fear? Is it discord? Rejection? Being perceived as weak? This undertaking demands immense self-compassion. It is not an exercise in self-recrimination or condemnation. The shells were erected for a purpose, to safeguard you when you stood most in need. They were acts of self-preservation. The objective now is not to denigrate them, but to comprehend them, to acknowledge their history, and to gently begin to loosen their dominion. To truly embark on this recognition, we must pose ourselves certain candid questions. What specific past experiences or perceived threats do I believe contributed to the formation of my primary emotional shells? Perhaps it was a childhood where the expression of anger was met with severe chastisement, leading to a shell of placid acquiescence. Or perhaps it was a betrayal in a prior relationship that engendered a shell of distrust, making it arduous to open oneself to new acquaintances. Reflecting on these origins illuminates that the shell was not an arbitrary choice, but a response to a perceived necessity or security. Subsequently, we must pinpoint the practical manifestations. In what specific scenarios or with which individuals do my shells assert themselves most forcefully? Do you find yourself becoming excessively agreeable when conversing with authority figures? Do you fall silent when solicited for your opinion in a group setting? Do you tend to deflect personal inquiries with humor or by diverting the subject? Identifying these triggers and the attendant thoughts and feelings, the apprehension, the fear, the urge to retreat, paints a more vivid portrait of your unique shell's architecture. For example, you might observe that whenever someone offers constructive criticism, your immediate thought is, they believe I am insufficient, and your shell responds by shutting down or becoming defensive. Finally, it is imperative to acknowledge the tangible, day-to-day repercussions of maintaining these shells. How do they impinge upon your relationships? Do they precipitate misunderstandings, a dearth of emotional intimacy, or frequent disputes arising from unarticulated needs? How do they affect your professional life? Do they impede your willingness to take risks, to seek advancement, or to collaborate effectively? And what is the cumulative impact on your sense of well-being? Do you experience a persistent feeling of isolation, a lack of fulfillment, or a pervasive sense of disconnection from yourself and others? Recognizing these costs serves as a potent impetus for transformation. It is the realization that while the shell offers a semblance of safety, it is purchased at the price of a life fully lived, a life of authentic connection and genuine emotional liberty. Once we begin to perceive the intricate architecture of our personal shells, we can commence to grasp why they were constructed and the silent narratives they enshrine. But their recognition is merely the initial step. The subsequent, vital phase is to comprehend the profound influence of this silence, not solely upon ourselves, but upon the world that surrounds us. 4. Why we build defense mechanisms. From the genesis of our existence, survival has been an intrinsic wiring. It is a profound, ancestral impulse that resonates beneath the surface of all our endeavors. When confronted with circumstances that feel overwhelming, terrifying, or unbearably painful, our bodies and minds instinctively deploy protective stratagems. Picture a fledgling bird, startled by an abrupt sound. It freezes, its heart a frantic drum against its ribs, its senses hypervigilant, poised for flight at the slightest intimation of peril. This is the unadulterated essence of a defense mechanism, a biological imperative for self-preservation. Our emotional landscapes are no less susceptible. When an experience threatens our sense of equilibrium, our emotional security, or our bonds with others, we commence the construction of what we term an emotional shell. These shells do not arise from malice or a disposition to obstruct. Rather, they are forged from the elemental need to endure, to erect a bulwark against perceived harm. Envision a delicate blossom striving to unfurl in a tempestuous, wind-swept expanse. It may bend and contort, finding refuge by hunkering down, shielding its tender petals from being rent asunder. This yielding, this sheltering, marks the nascent stages of a shell. These protective responses are imbued with extraordinary potency. When submerged in sorrow, for instance, we may recoil instinctively, creating a chasm of distance. If intense anger surges, we might become inert, retreating into a profound silence. Should the specter of rejection loom, we might adopt an unassailable agreeableness, never betraying a hint of dissent. These are all natural, often involuntary, maneuvers our system employs to navigate overwhelming experiences. They are the foundational stones in the edifice of our emotional armor. The brain, in its sagacity, perpetually scans for threats. These encompass not only physical dangers, but emotional ones as well. The dread of judgment, the sting of censure, the gnawing ache of solitude, or the mortification of error can feel as perilous as a predator in the wild. Thus, we devise strategies to elude these sensations, or at least to mitigate their impact. We might learn to intellectualize our emotions, dissecting them with detached analysis rather than experiencing them. We may rationalize our reactions, convincing ourselves that our feelings are invalid or that we ought not to be perturbed. Or we might simply numb ourselves, suppressing any emotion that feels too disquieting. All these are stratagems to reinforce that protective shell, rendering it more robust and resilient. These nascent survival strategies are frequently absorbed from our milieu. In childhood, we internalize implicit directives regarding the management of emotions. If we mature in an environment where the expression of sadness is met with disapprobation, or where anger is deemed perilous, we learn to suppress these feelings. We might encounter pronouncements such as, "Boys, don't cry," or "Don't be so sensitive," or "Just be strong." These admonishments, however well-intentioned, convey that certain emotions are unacceptable and that, to earn affection or acceptance, we must conceal them. We learn to perform a curated version of ourselves, one deemed more palatable, and in doing so, commence the erection of an increasingly elaborate shell. Consider, for example, Sarah. From her tenderest years, Sarah possessed a sensitive disposition, experiencing emotions with profound depth. At the age of 5, when she sustained a severe knee abrasion and wept inconsolably, her father, a man school, in stoicism, admonished her, "Stop crying, Sarah. You're a big girl now. There's nothing to cry about." While his intent was likely to offer solace and foster resilience, Sarah internalized a different message. Her tears, her pain, were inadmissible. Her natural response to hurt was met with dismissal. Over time, Sarah learned to stifle her tears, to present a facade of fortitude, and to eschew any outward display of vulnerability. This marked the inception of her emotional shell, a protective integument fashioned to shield her from the discomfort of her own suffering and from the perceived disapproval of others. This learned behavior becomes deeply entrenched. What began as a simple act of self-preservation transmutes into an ingrained mode of being. We grow so accustomed to donning our emotional armor that we forget the sensation of its absence. The shell, once a transient shield, gradually feels like an intrinsic component of our identity. It is akin to wearing a heavy overcoat on a balmy day. It offers protection but also impedes movement and induces an uncomfortable warmth. Beyond immediate perils, these defense mechanisms frequently serve to insulate us from deeper, more profound apprehensions. We may harbor fears of rejection, of inadequacy, of abandonment, or of losing control. The shell functions as a bulwark against these terrifying eventualities. By withholding our authentic selves, by refraining from articulating our vulnerabilities, we believe we are safeguarding ourselves from the potential agony of these fears materializing. If our imperfections remain unseen, they cannot be weaponized against us. If we never solicit aid, we cannot be rebuffed. If we maintain tight rein over our emotions, we cannot be overwhelmed. This is where the perception of threat assumes paramount importance. Often, the actual threat is far less formidable than the one our minds contrive. The The fear of judgment may be magnified in our consciousness, leading us to believe that a minor misstep will precipitate complete social ostracization, when in reality, most individuals are too absorbed in their own lives to dwell on our imperfections. The dread of succumbing to sorrow might compel us to withdraw entirely, when in fact, allowing ourselves to experience that sadness for a brief interval might ultimately yield a sense of relief and catharsis. Our defense mechanisms, though designed to shield us from perceived threats, frequently engender a reality that is more isolating and restrictive than the original danger. The illusion of dominion that these defense mechanisms afford is a potent allure. Life is inherently capricious. We cannot command all that befalls us, and we certainly cannot dictate the reactions of others. This uncertainty can be disquieting. By meticulously regulating our utterances, our actions, and the emotions we permit ourselves to express, we cultivate a semblance of order and predictability. We feel as though we have a grasp on matters even when we do not. This perceived control can be profoundly comforting, particularly when we have endured periods of chaos or helplessness. Consider Mark. Mark achieved considerable professional success, yet grappled with a deep-seated anxiety regarding his performance. He perpetually fretted about errors, about being perceived as incompetent. To cope, he cultivated a habit of over-preparation for every engagement, meticulously scripting his contributions and eschewing spontaneous dialogues that might catch him unawares. This allowed him to feel in command of the situation, to project an image of polish and confidence. However, this incessant vigilance and craving for control meant he seldom felt genuinely relaxed or present in his work. He was so preoccupied with maintaining his facade of competence that he could not truly engage with his colleagues or savor the fruits of his labor. His shell, erected to shield him from the fear of inadequacy, also precluded him from experiencing authentic connection and professional liberation. The price of this perceived control, however, is substantial. While these mechanisms may preserve us from immediate emotional pain, they also erect barriers between us and our authentic selves, and between us and others. Every emotion we suppress, every thought we censor, every facet of ourselves we sequester to preserve the shell, represents a fragment of our true identity that remains unrevealed. This engenders a profound sense of isolation. We may be encircled by people, yet feel utterly alone, for no one truly comprehends the genuine us. We yearn for connection, for understanding, but our shell renders it impossible for anyone to approach closely enough to offer it. The energy requisite to sustain these shells is immense. Imagine holding a considerable weight aloft for prolonged durations. It is an arduous undertaking. Similarly, the ceaseless monitoring of our words, our expressions, and our reactions to ensure we reveal no more than is deemed appropriate drains our mental and emotional reserves. This energy could otherwise be channeled into growth, into learning, into forging meaningful relationships, or simply into savoring life. Instead, it is consumed by the effort of maintaining the shell's integrity. So, why do we construct these defense mechanisms? This is a question that probes the very core of our human experience. They are not indicative of weakness or inherent flaws. They are sophisticated, albeit frequently unconscious, survival strategies. They are the product of our innate drive to protect ourselves from pain, rejection, and overwhelm. They are shaped by our environments, by the messages we receive regarding what is permissible and what is not, and they offer us an illusion of control in an often uncertain world. But as we have observed, these protective strategies, born of necessity, can devolve into prisons. They can impede us from experiencing the fullness of life, from forging deep connections with ourselves and with others. The very elements that once ensured our safety can now confine us, leading to feelings of confusion, isolation, and a sense of being ensnared within ourselves. When we revisit Sarah, her father's words, though perhaps not intended to inflict lasting damage, initiated a pattern of emotional suppression. Her shell, constructed to shield her from the perceived disapproval of exhibiting sadness, prevented her from fully processing her childhood hurts. This meant that as an adult, she found it challenging to articulate her needs, to solicit support, or to allow herself to be vulnerable in relationships. She had become so adept at projecting an image of strength and composure that others rarely perceived her struggles, and she, in turn, found it difficult to permit anyone access. The protection she had erected had become a barrier to genuine intimacy. Similarly, Mark's relentless pursuit of control, while seemingly safeguarding him from the fear of failure, deprived him of the joy of spontaneity and the richness of authentic interaction. His shell, designed to shield him from perceived incompetence, also prevented him from experiencing the freedom that arises from trusting oneself and others. He was so intent on avoiding error that he missed opportunities for genuine connection and personal advancement. Comprehending these origins is not an exercise in assigning culpability. It is an endeavor to cultivate insight. It is about recognizing that these defense mechanisms, these emotional shells, were constructed with a specific purpose. They served us at a particular juncture, aiding us in navigating arduous terrain. But like any instrument that has outlived its initial utility, they can become cumbersome and constricting. The perception of threat that once rendered them indispensable may have receded, or the actual danger may have dissipated, yet the habit of employing the shell persists. The critical distinction here lies between the perception of threat and the actual threat. Our minds are remarkably adept at crafting narratives, at forecasting future outcomes based on past experiences. Frequently, the emotional threat we perceive is a projection of past wounds or anxieties onto present circumstances. A critical remark might trigger a deep-seated fear of inadequacy, prompting us to retreat into our shell, even if the comment was mild and not intended as a personal indictment. Our defense mechanisms are activated by this perceived threat, this internal alarm, which may be sounding with greater intensity than the actual situation warrants. This recognition constitutes the initial stride. It empowers us to approach our own protective patterns with empathy rather than judgment. We can begin to perceive that these shells are not inherent deficiencies, but rather learned responses that, while once vital, may now be impeding our progress. They are the accumulated silence of years, muffling our authentic voices, and the journey of shattering the shell commences with understanding the rationale behind its construction. It involves acknowledging the instinct for survival that propelled their creation, and then, with newfound awareness, considering whether they continue to serve our highest good, or if they have become the very ramparts that prevent us from living a full and authentic existence. Chapter 2. Breaking Free. 1. Steps to overcome limitations. The emergence from silence, from the constricting confines of our emotional fortresses, commences not with a singular, dramatic act, but with a subtle, unyielding unraveling. For years, perhaps even for decades, these fortresses have served a vital purpose. They were our bulwarks against tempests we felt too frail to withstand, our sanctuaries when the world presented itself as overwhelmingly harsh. Yet, as we have matured, as our understanding of ourselves and the world has deepened, these once protective ramparts can begin to feel like an inescapable prison. The pertinent inquiry shifts from whether we can break free to how. The inaugural, and arguably most crucial, step in dismantling these barriers involves a transition from a vague sense of being shut down to a precise comprehension of how our individual fortress operates. This is akin to a detective meticulously examining a crime scene, searching for every pertinent clue. Our emotional fortress is not an monolithic, impregnable structure. It is an intricate edifice constructed from a myriad of disparate elements and coping mechanisms. Recognizing these specific components is paramount to discerning where and how to commence the process of erosion. Consider your daily existence. How do you respond when confronted with a challenge or a perceived lack of understanding? Do you find yourself retreating, assuming a posture of quietude and distance, harboring the hope that the situation will simply dissipate? This represents a common manifestation, the silent withdrawal, wherein communication abruptly ceases. Alternatively, perhaps you adopt an attitude of excessive compliance, readily assenting to every request and proposition, even when such acquiescence contravenes your own intrinsic needs or desires. This is the hallmark of people-pleasing, a fortress designed to circumvent conflict at all costs. Some among us may detect a propensity for relentless self-recrimination, an incessant internal monologue highlighting perceived deficiencies and errors. This internalized censure can serve as a formidable preemptive measure against external critique, effectively preempting any potential judgment. Then there is perfectionism, the conviction that by executing every task with flawless precision, one renders oneself impervious to criticism. Or perhaps your fortress manifests as a form of aggressive defensiveness, wherein any intimation of criticism is met with a vigorous, often irate counteroffensive. These are not indicators of inherent weakness, rather, they are learned behaviors, strategies we devise to navigate adversity. They constitute the very bricks and mortar of our fortress, and the initial stride toward transcending limitations lies in identifying these specific constituent elements within our own lives. It is about observing the patterns. When does the fortress materialize? What are its triggers? How does it present itself in action? This nascent awareness forms the bedrock upon which all subsequent progress is built. Once we can discern the specific modalities through which our fortress operates, we can begin to apprehend what lies concealed beneath its facade. Emotional fortresses are not erected in a vacuum, they are a direct response to deeply ingrained beliefs and pervasive fears. These are the underlying assumptions we harbor about ourselves and the world that fuel our imperative for protection. Common fears encompass the terror of being scrutinized, the dread of repudiation, or a profound sense of inadequacy, that pervasive sensation of being fundamentally not good enough. These fears can become so deeply entrenched over time, so intrinsically woven into our inner landscape, that we come to accept them as immutable truths. For an individual who has spent 52 years meticulously constructing their fortress, these beliefs have had ample time to solidify, becoming virtually unassailable pillars of their identity. The psychological mechanism at play here is profoundly potent. When we harbor an intrinsic conviction that we are fundamentally flawed, or that revealing our authentic selves will inevitably lead to pain, our fortress becomes our sole logical recourse for survival. It is, in essence, a primal survival instinct. To attenuate the fortress, we must gently, yet resolutely, challenge these foundational fears and beliefs. This does not entail a pretense that these fears are non-existent. Rather, it necessitates questioning their veracity. We can commence by posing the question, is this belief truly grounded in reality? For instance, if you are consumed by the fear of rejection, inquire, has every single individual with whom I have shared my vulnerability subsequently rejected me? Or have some responded with empathy and understanding? We can systematically gather evidence, much like an attorney constructing a legal case, to demonstrate to ourselves that our fears, while undeniably potent, may not represent absolute certainties. One practical technique employed in this endeavor is known as cognitive restructuring. This process involves identifying a deleterious thought pattern, e.g., if I voice my opinion, others will perceive me as unintelligent, critically examining its logical foundation, and subsequently supplanting it with a more balanced and realistic cognition, e.g., it is plausible that some individuals may disagree, but it is equally probable that others will find my perspective to be of value. My inherent worth is not contingent upon universal approval. Another efficacious approach is to simply observe these fear-driven thoughts without succor. Acknowledge their presence, perhaps by committing them to writing, and then consciously elect to divest them of their power to dictate your actions. This deliberate act of conscious volition, repeated consistently over time, begins to loosen the tenacious grip of these entrenched fears, thereby weakening the fortress they steadfastly uphold. The odyssey of liberation is not characterized by the sudden, cataclysmic shattering of the fortress in a singular, dramatic instant. Instead, it is an ongoing process of learning to inhabit life more fully outside its confines, one incremental step at a time. This is where the principle of gradual exposure assumes paramount importance. Envision it as the acquisition of swimming proficiency. One does not plunge into the deepest waters on their inaugural attempt. The process commences in the shallows, gradually acclimatizing to the water's embrace, discerning its temperature, and assiduously cultivating self-assurance. Analogously, in navigating our emotional fortresses, we can engage in small, manageable acts of vulnerability and authentic expression within low-stakes environments. This might entail articulating a mild preference in a casual exchange, admitting an absence of knowledge without succumbing to shame, or conveying a simple personal inclination. For example, if your fortress compels you to evade any semblance of conflict, a modest step could involve politely suggesting an alternative restaurant for dinner, rather than passively acquiescing to the group's prevailing choice. Another illustrative instance could be sharing a brief, unvarnished sentiment with a trusted confidant, perhaps stating, "I am feeling somewhat fatigued today," in lieu of masking it with a veneer of cheerful dissimulation. Each of these minor actions represents a deliberate excursion beyond the perceived sanctuary of the fortress. They provide opportunities to experience the reality of authentic self-expression and to observe that the dreaded repercussions frequently fail to materialize. Crucially, it is imperative to acknowledge and celebrate these modest triumphs. They are not inconsequential. They are the foundational elements of a nascent mode of existence. They are the gentle erosion of the fortress, permitting a greater influx of light. The contrast with the earlier experience of a scream is profoundly significant. A scream can serve as a potent, indispensable release, a sudden expulsion of pent-up emotional energy. However, it can also be overwhelming, leaving one feeling depleted and disoriented, perhaps even more deeply entrenched within the fortress, due to the sheer intensity of the experience. Gradual exposure, conversely, is dedicated to cultivating sustainable patterns of authentic expression. It is about learning to articulate one's needs and feelings in ways that are both truthful and manageable, thereby fostering a greater sense of control and reducing feelings of being overwhelmed. This process instills the understanding that one can be perceived and heard without being annihilated. As we embark upon this journey of dismantling our emotional fortresses, it is inevitable that we will encounter moments of profound discomfort, pervasive uncertainty, and even what may be perceived as outright failure. We might endeavor to exhibit vulnerability only to find ourselves reverting to ingrained patterns, or we may express ourselves only to receive a response that falls short of our expectations. These junctures are not grounds for relinquishment or for concluding the impossibility of change. Instead, they represent prime opportunities to cultivate profound self-compassion and to fortify our resilience. Self-recrimination serves as a potent reinforcement mechanism for the fortress. When we falter, the internal critic often interjects, proclaiming, "See, you are incapable of this. You are not sufficiently adequate." This internal voice serves only to reinforce the fortress's walls, convincing us of its indispensable role in our protection. Self-compassion, however, offers an alternative pathway. It entails treating ourselves with the same kindness, understanding, and acceptance we would extend to a cherished friend navigating hardship. When you detect a nascent feeling of discouragement, pause and inquire, "What counsel would I offer to a friend in this predicament?" You would likely proffer words of encouragement, acknowledge their earnest efforts, and remind them that setbacks are an intrinsic component of any endeavor. Applying this same gentle approach to oneself is of paramount importance. Resilience is not synonymous with an absence of stumbles. Rather, it is the capacity to rise after each fall. Each instance in which we confront a challenge, acknowledge our emotions, and consciously choose to persevere, we are actively constructing our resilience. This necessitates a reframing of failures not as definitive pronouncements on our character, but as invaluable learning experiences. What insights did I glean from that interaction? What alternative approach might I adopt in the future? This paradigm shift transmutes potential retreat into forward momentum. The bewilderment that may ensue following a powerful emotional release or a less than ideal attempt at vulnerability is an intrinsic facet of this transformative process. Rather than judging this confusion, self-compassion permits us to acknowledge it. It is permissible to feel disoriented at this juncture. This represents uncharted territory. This acceptance fosters a secure environment for growth, rather than serving as an impetus to retreat into the familiar, albeit confining embrace of the fortress. As we commence the active dismantling of our emotional fortresses, we will invariably encounter moments of profound disorientation, akin to the bewilderment experienced after a potent emotional release. This transition, while undoubtedly arduous, also represents the fertile ground for cultivating a novel form of fortitude, one not predicated on defense, but on authentic connection and intrinsic resilience. In the subsequent section, we shall delve into the methods for nurturing this burgeoning resilience and establishing a foundation for enduring emotional liberation. 2. Embracing vulnerability. The world often murmurs that baring one's soul is a testament to weakness, a perilous invitation for wounds. We learn to erect ramparts, formidable and high, to safeguard our inner selves. These ramparts we christen our emotional shells, shields meticulously forged over years, perhaps decades, from every perceived threat. They are designed to shield the tender core of our being, the parts that resonate deeply, that ache for communion, that harbor uncertainty and a tremor of fear. Yet, a truth, perhaps unsettling at first, lies at their heart. These very shells, crafted for protection, can morph into our most confining prisons. They may keep us safe, undeniably, but they also obstruct the very essence of living, of connecting, of truly inhabiting our authentic selves. The notion of shattering these shells conjures images of a single, cataclysmic blow, a feat of Herculean strength. However, the reality is far more subtle and immeasurably more valiant. Genuine liberation arises not from brute force, but from a deliberate, courageous choice to welcome illumination, even when it casts an uncomfortable glow. It is the dawning realization that true fortitude resides not in an unblemished exterior, but in the brave decision to be seen in our entirety with all our imperfections, even when the prospect is daunting. This is the very crucible of embracing vulnerability. Consider this. Our emotional shells are masterpieces of defensive engineering, meticulously designed to banish vulnerability. They are the gilded armor that conceals our true essence, the painted masks that project an air of unflappable control, or cool indifference, the stifling silence that muffles our genuine sentiments. This relentless vigilance, this ceaseless effort to keep the world at bay, propels us down a solitary path. We may feel secure within our fortifications, yet we are profoundly alone. Paradoxically, this perpetual guarding renders us more susceptible to fracture in the long run. When we deny others access to our struggles, our doubts, our raw emotions, we carve a chasm between ourselves and the world, and even between ourselves and our own hearts. The longer these shells have been our companions, perhaps for 52 years, as some might lament, the more they become indistinguishable from our very identity, rendering the concept of vulnerability utterly alien, even perilous. But what if vulnerability is not weakness at all? What if it is, in fact, courage cloaked in humility? Societal narratives frequently equate vulnerability with susceptibility to injury, with inadequacy, with a diminished self. We are exhorted to be steadfast, to be stoic, to maintain an unruffled facade. Yet, this is a profound misapprehension of genuine strength. Vulnerability is the audacious choice to be revealed, precisely as one is, with all perceived flaws and inherent uncertainties. It is the willingness to lay bare one's heart, even when the potential repercussions inspire terror. This is the antithesis of weakness. It is an act of profound courage. It is the indispensable genesis of cracking open the shell that has confined you for so long. Picture the raw, unrestrained cry that might erupt from one who has suppressed their emotions for years. While jarring and perhaps bewildering to onlookers, that cry is an unvarnished outpouring of pure expression. It is a manifestation of vulnerability that, by its very nature, shatters the silence. It is a moment when the shell splinters, permitting something authentic to emerge. This is not a mark of failure. It is an indication that defenses are being tested, that the individual is beginning to experience a reality beyond their customary guardedness. The ensuing bewilderment, the sensation of being adrift, is not a summons to retreat into the shell. Rather, it can serve as a potent harbinger of progress. It signifies your emergence into uncharted territory, and it is perfectly acceptable to feel a measure of disorientation as you navigate it. The pathway out of this confinement does not necessitate a sudden, cataclysmic demolition of your protective ramparts. Instead, it commences with the deliberate cultivation of small, manageable fractures within your shell. It is not about an immediate dismantling, but about allowing nascent glimpses of your true self to surface. Each modest act of vulnerability acts as a minuscule aperture, permitting a sliver of light and air to penetrate. These moments, however ephemeral, fortify resilience. They demonstrate, in a gentle fashion, that the feared repercussions of being seen are often far less dire than anticipated. Each time you dare to be marginally more open, marginally more truthful, you affirm to yourself that you can withstand it, and perhaps even flourish as a consequence. So how do we embark upon embracing this courage, this vulnerability, when our shells have been so robustly constructed? It begins with a bedrock of self-compassion. This entails acknowledging that imperfection is an intrinsic facet of the human experience. It means extending to yourself the same gentleness and understanding you would offer a cherished companion in distress. Instead of self-recrimination for your fears or perceived deficiencies, you offer yourself grace. This is the fertile ground upon which vulnerability can begin to take root. Subsequently, we can engage in mindful observation. This practice involves learning to attend to your own apprehensions surrounding vulnerability without succumbing to immediate reaction. When you sense that familiar impulse to withdraw, to fortify the wall, pause. Simply observe it. How does that fear manifest physically within you? What thoughts are coursing through your mind? By observing these sensations without judgment, you begin to forge a subtle interstice between the fear and your response to it. Within this space, choice takes hold. Then we move to the practice of intentional disclosure, undertaken incrementally. This is not an invitation to unburden your most profound secrets to strangers. It is about rehearsing the sharing of your authentic thoughts and feelings in scenarios with minimal consequence. It might be as simple as articulating a genuine preference in conversation, admitting a minor oversight, or conveying an emotion you are experiencing to someone you trust. These modest acts of openness, repeated over time, expand your capacity for vulnerability. They are akin to small, controlled experiments, testing the waters and revealing that you can be seen and still be embraced. And finally, we must cultivate the ability to accept discomfort. Vulnerability frequently ushers in a degree of unease. It can feel awkward, exposed, or even tinged with apprehension. The crucial element is to learn to reside with that discomfort rather than immediately seeking escape. Recall that sensation of disorientation following an emotional eruption? That is a form of discomfort. Instead of interpreting it as a cue to shut down, perceive it as a signal that you are extending beyond your accustomed boundaries. Mastering the tolerance of this discomfort is paramount. It is within these moments of unease that true growth unfolds. How does the apprehension of vulnerability directly contribute to the fortification and perpetuation of emotional shells? The connection is profoundly psychological and behavioral. When we encounter an experience that feels inimical to our sense of self, perhaps a scathing critique, a rejection, or a moment of profound shame, our primal instinct is self-preservation. This instinct, repeatedly engaged, precipitates the unconscious construction of defenses. The dread of re-experiencing that pain becomes a potent impetus for building a more robust shell. For instance, if a child is repeatedly subjected to shame for expressing sorrow, they learn that such expressions elicit negative repercussions. Their shell then coalesces to preclude future displays of sadness. This learned behavior becomes deeply ingrained. The fear of vulnerability acts as a constant reinforcement, whispering, "See? It is perilous out there. Remain ensconced within your shell." This fear then fuels the very actions that sustain the shell: the avoidance of profound conversations, the suppression of emotions, the erection of barriers, and the presentation of an unassailable facade. The shell is not merely a passive construct. It is an active defense mechanism, perpetually reinforced by the dread of exposure. In what ways can the experience of confusion or disorientation following an act of vulnerability actually serve as a positive indicator of progress rather than a sign of failure? This is a critical juncture because it challenges our conventional interpretation of discomfort. When we have resided for an extended period behind a protective shell, our emotional terrain becomes predictable. We are intimately familiar with the boundaries, the unspoken rules, the expected outcomes. When we dare to be vulnerable, we venture beyond this familiar landscape. The confusion arises because our internal compass, so accustomed to navigating within the confines of the shell, is now attempting to orient itself in a new, less defined expanse. This disorientation is a testament to the fact that our established coping mechanisms are being challenged, that the old patterns are no longer adequate. It signifies that we are beginning to experience a broader spectrum of emotions and reactions, some of which may be novel. Consider it akin to acquiring a new skill. Initially, it feels awkward and bewildering, but that bewilderment is an indispensable precursor to mastery. Similarly, this disorientation is evidence that your capacity for authentic emotional experience is expanding. It is a signal that the shell is indeed yielding, and that you are beginning to feel sentiments that have long been dormant. It is not a failure, it is an opening. What are the tangible, real-world benefits that individuals can anticipate by actively choosing to embrace vulnerability even when it feels arduous? The rewards are profound and far-reaching. Emotionally, embracing vulnerability fosters a heightened sense of liberation and authenticity. When the ceaseless effort of self-guarding is relinquished, there is a significant diminution of stress and anxiety. One feels more vibrantly alive, more present in the unfolding tapestry of their own existence. Relationally, vulnerability serves as the fundamental cornerstone of genuine connection. It affords others the opportunity to perceive and know the authentic you, cultivating deeper intimacy, trust, and mutual understanding in friendships, romantic partnerships, and familial bonds. When you exhibit vulnerability, you grant others implicit permission to reciprocate, thereby creating a sanctuary for shared empathy and support. Professionally, though it may seem counterintuitive, vulnerability can actually enhance efficacy. It can lead to more cohesive teamwork, more candid feedback, and a greater aptitude for innovation and problem solving. When you can candidly admit to not knowing something or openly voice a concern, it cultivates a more collaborative and productive milieu. Furthermore, by embracing vulnerability, you nurture a more robust sense of self-worth. You discover that your intrinsic value is not contingent upon projecting an image of perfection or never faltering. You uncover that your true strength resides in your capacity to be open, to connect, and to evolve. While embracing vulnerability represents the courageous inaugural step in fracturing the shell, it frequently necessitates a conscious and deliberate cultivation of self-awareness to truly comprehend the intricate patterns that ensnare us. The subsequent step, therefore, is to direct this newfound courage inward, to meticulously explore the complex architecture of our own defenses and to commence the deliberate process of their deconstruction. 3. Engaging with others. The world beyond our carefully constructed confines can seem a cacophony, a distant rumble after the prolonged quietude of introspection. To contemplate emergence, to envision genuine connection, feels akin to stepping onto a stage bereft of one's lines. The very architecture of those protective walls, those emotional edifices, was erected to shield us from the barbs of hurt, the scrutiny of judgment, and the overwhelming tide of emotions that surface when one is truly perceived. Thus, as the impulse to unfurl begins to stir, fear, an ancient sentinel, inevitably rises. It is an instinctual dread that whispers of potential harm, of an unwelcome reception to the self laid bare. This fear is the very echo of the shell's original purpose. To engage with others, then, transcends mere discourse. It is a direct confrontation with the defense mechanisms that have long served as our bulwark. It is akin to shedding a heavy cloak on a brisk day. The chill is undeniable, yet the liberation of unburdened movement is the ultimate reward. For extended periods, inhabiting such an internal shell often reduces life to a spectator sport. We observe the ebb and flow of human experience, laughter, tears, conflict, affection from a secure remove. A faint yearning may surface, a whisper of desire to be immersed, but the perceived risk of exposure looms too large. We remain on the periphery, becoming adept observers rather than active participants. To break free necessitates a fundamental recalibrance of this posture, a transition from passive witness to active player. This does not imply an immediate transformation into the life of the party or an effortless plunge into profound dialogues. It signifies the adoption of small, deliberate acts of engagement. It might be as simple as meeting a stranger's gaze with an open smile or inquiring about a colleague's weekend. It is the conscious choice to be present, even when the ground feels unsteady. Consider the individual who has spent years observing avian life from a window. They may possess an encyclopedic knowledge of species, songs, and habits. Yet, until they venture outdoors, feel the breeze, and perhaps offer a seed, they have not truly experienced the birds. Engaging with others is that step into the open air, an invitation to partake in life's unfolding, not merely to chronicle it. The true essence of liberation, the genuine egress from prolonged silence, lies not in amplifying the volume of our voices. It resides in the resonance of truthful utterance. We can fill hours with discourse on the weather or televised events, but such exchanges are akin to whistling in a graveyard. They occupy the air, but forge no true bond. Authentic connection is forged when we dare to speak from the core of our being, even when that core feels fragile or uncertain. Here, authenticity becomes the bedrock. It distinguishes a perfunctory nod from a heartfelt greeting, a manufactured compliment from sincere appreciation. As we begin to articulate our genuine sentiments, our authentic thoughts, however minor the expression, we extend an invitation into our inner landscape. This vulnerability, this willingness to be seen as we are, is the mortar that binds individuals together. It is a nascent seed of truth, which, when sown in the fertile ground of relationship, can blossom into something robust and beautiful. In our authenticity, we cease to conceal ourselves behind artifice. We present ourselves as we are, and in doing so, we offer the most potent invitation for others to reveal themselves in kind. As we tentatively extend ourselves outward, as we begin to articulate our truth in modest increments, we may experience a subtle disquiet. Picture a plant relegated to prolonged darkness. Upon its introduction to sunlight, it may not immediately orient its leaves toward the light. It might feel a measure of disorientation, a slight overwhelm from the luminescence and novel sensations. This sense of bewilderment is entirely natural as we commence more authentic engagement. For years, our emotional shells have dictated the parameters of our interactions, the scope of our expression, and the extent of our concealment. Suddenly, we are experimenting with novel modes of being, new avenues of self-expression, and the experience can feel ungainly. Words may falter, intentions may be misconstrued, or reactions may be misinterpreted. This is a phase of learning and adaptation. It resembles the process of regaining mobility after a protracted illness. There may be wobbles, even stumbles, but each step, however tentative, signifies progress. It is imperative to approach this period with self-compassion. Acknowledge the confusion, embrace the awkwardness, and recognize that these sensations are indicators of your active emergence from your shell. The exquisite revelation of engaging with others is its reciprocal nature. When we courageously breach the confines of our shells and connect with genuine authenticity, we not only cultivate our own liberation, but also foster an environment conducive to our ongoing evolution. Imagine an individual accustomed to a highly circumscribed and tranquil existence. Upon extending invitations to friends, and these friends introduce laughter, warmth, and sincere interest, that space transforms from a solitary confinement into a welcoming sanctuary. Positive, authentic interactions serve as the vital elements, the sunshine and rain for the germination of our personal metamorphosis. When our authentic expressions are met with understanding and acceptance, it is a profound validation. It communicates that our true selves are not sources of apprehension, but rather recipients of affection and esteem. Such encouragement can embolden us to undertake more significant steps, to dismantle further layers of our shell, and to embrace our freedom with greater completeness. It is a virtuous cycle. The more we engage authentically, the more unburdened we become, and the more unburdened we become, the more capable we are of authentic engagement. Consider Sarah, who had meticulously constructed a formidable emotional shell over nearly 50 years. It was a masterpiece of polite smiles, agreeable nods, and a carefully cultivated absence of personal conviction. Her shell served as a bulwark against the perceived chaos of deep emotional exchange, against the peril of being truly known and, consequently, potentially rebuffed. For years, she observed life unfold from a distance, participating only in the most superficial of capacities. Conversations were akin to navigating treacherous minefields, where any misstep risked exposing a latent vulnerability. As Sarah embarked on her journey of liberation, the initial obstacle was the mere contemplation of engaging differently. The prospect of articulating a genuine emotion, however minor, sent a ripple of apprehension through her. Her therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma, advised a gradual approach. Think of it as testing the waters, Sarah, she had suggested. There's no need to plunge into the abyss. Sarah's inaugural attempt involved offering a sincere compliment to her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, regarding her exquisite garden. Abandoning her customary vague pleasantry, "Oh, it's lovely," Sarah paused, her gaze fixed on the vibrant roses, and articulated, "Mrs. Gable, your roses are truly breathtaking. Their richness of color evokes a feeling of joy within me." It was a small deviation, a few more words than usual, imbued with a touch of personal sentiment. Mrs. Gable's countenance brightened. "Oh, thank you, dear. That's remarkably kind of you to say. I've poured a great deal of affection into them." This minor exchange, this nascent moment of genuine connection, felt surprisingly gratifying. It was not fraught with terror. It was not met with censure. It was met with warmth. Yet, the following day, when a colleague solicited Sarah's perspective on a project, the ingrained impulse to retreat resurfaced. Her shell whispered, "Simply concur. It is the path of least resistance. Do not risk appearing foolish." Nevertheless, a minute fissure had appeared in the shell. Sarah inhaled deeply and responded, "Well, I've been considering it, and I possess a slightly divergent notion. I wonder if we might explore." She articulated her thought, her voice betraying a subtle tremor. Her colleague listened with rapt attention. "That is an intriguing viewpoint, Sarah. I had not considered it from that angle. Let us investigate it." This experience, much like the one with Mrs. Gable, illuminated for Sarah that authentic engagement was not contingent upon flawlessness or the possession of unerringly correct pronouncements. It was about the willingness to share her own insights and feelings, even when they diverged from those of others. She recognized that her shell had frequently compelled her to suppress her own ideas for fear of discord, thereby forfeiting opportunities for more fruitful collaboration and profound understanding. The quality of her engagement was undergoing a transformation. Previously, it had been defensive and superficial. Now, it was evolving into a more active and forthright mode, albeit still tinged with the degree of hesitation. However, this burgeoning willingness to engage also engendered a sense of disorientation. Sarah found herself meticulously dissecting every interaction. Did her colleague genuinely appreciate her idea, or was it merely a social courtesy? Did Mrs. Gable's smile signify true appreciation for the compliment, or was it simply a conditioned response? This confusion was the natural consequence of learning a new lexicon, the language of authentic connection. For so long, her internal monologue had been dedicated to the management of her shell, to the preservation of a facade. Now, she was endeavoring to decipher the subtle nuances of genuine human interaction, a process akin to navigating a dense fog. She had to learn to interpret the responses of others not as definitive judgments of her worth, but as reactions to her expressed self, a self that was still in the process of learning to articulate. One afternoon, Sarah's friend, Maria, a woman of vibrant spirit and forthright demeanor, observed Sarah's increasing reticence. "You seemed a bit withdrawn lately, Sarah," Maria remarked gently, her brow creased with concern. "Is everything all right?" Sarah's immediate inclination was to deflect, to offer a vague reassurance. But she recalled Dr. Sharma's counsel: participation, not mere observation. She drew a deep breath. "To be entirely candid, Maria," she began, her voice soft, "I have been attempting to open myself up a bit more. It feels peculiar, and at times, I question if I am proceeding correctly. It's as if I am relearning how to speak." Maria's expression softened into one of understanding. She reached out and gently clasped Sarah's hand. "Oh, Sarah, that sounds like a significant undertaking. It is perfectly acceptable to feel peculiar. It is permissible to falter. I am here for you, whatever you may require." This moment proved revelatory for Sarah. Maria's response was not one of judgment, but of unwavering support. It was an invitation to embrace vulnerability, coupled with a pledge of acceptance. Sarah realized that her shell had not only shielded her from potential harm, but had also precluded her from experiencing the profound power of genuine human connection and solace. By daring to articulate her confusion, her uncertainty, she had created an opening for her friend to provide precisely what she needed. This inherent reciprocity of connection was becoming increasingly evident. Her willingness to be perceived, even in her moments of bewilderment, was fostering an environment wherein her friend could offer comfort and encouragement. This, in turn, was bolstering Sarah's courage to continue shedding the layers of her shell, to engage more fully in the richness of life and interpersonal relationships. The trajectory forward was not about erasing the past or feigning ignorance of the shell's existence, but about cultivating novel modes of being that honored her journey while embracing the liberating embrace of authentic engagement. 4. Taking action towards change. The notion of actively dismantling our emotional fortifications can feel as daunting as confronting a colossal peak, its summit shrouded in mist. We might find ourselves adrift in a sea of questions. From where do I even begin? Or what if my efforts prove futile? It is remarkably easy to become ensnared in the eddy of desiring transformation yet feeling utterly inert, paralyzed by indecision about the appropriate course of action. We may even harbor the illusion of a singular, monumental first step that will, by some arcane magic, unlock all subsequent progress. Yet, the reality is far more nuanced. Liberation from these emotional prisons is seldom the product of a single, heroic leap. Rather, it is a tapestry woven from a succession of small, intentional choices, each one diligently placed, that gradually, inexorably, loosens the shell's tenacious grip. Consider the sheer duration these protective layers have accompanied us. For some, this has been a lifelong companion, spanning years, even decades, perhaps 52 years as our earlier discussions have illuminated. Over this extensive period, these self-imposed bulwarks have become profoundly ingrained. They have sculpted our perception of the world, our self-regard, and the very manner in which we articulate our innermost being. Because their construction has been so meticulous and their development so protracted, they can feel inextricably fused with our identity, an immutable facet of our very existence. This is precisely why the concept of a singular, colossal first step can inspire such profound intimidation. It conjures the image of an abrupt, seismic shift that appears utterly unattainable. Instead of relentlessly searching for that one transcendent action, let us endeavor to reframe the very essence of the first step. It is not about a grand, ostentatious gesture. It is, in its purest form, a quiet, internal decree, the decision to commence. It is the precise instant when we acknowledge, even if only to ourselves in the hushed sanctuary of our own minds, that the possibility of change not only exists but is within reach. It is the subtle, almost imperceptible pivot from the resigned declaration, "This is simply how I am," to the dawning whisper, "Perhaps, just perhaps, I can be different." This internal recalibration, in itself, constitutes a potent genesis. It might manifest as the simple act of engaging with these very words, or pausing to truly consider a fleeting emotion that we habitually suppress. It is the nascent willingness to entertain the very notion of liberation, even when the path forward remains obscured. Reflect upon the profound impact when a long-suppressed emotion is finally released, akin to the raw, uninhibited cry of a released spirit. It can be startling, even disorienting. For a fleeting moment, the accustomed stillness of the shell is violently disrupted, and the individual may feel exposed, adrift, in uncertainty about what follows. This sensation of disorientation is not an indictment of failure. It is frequently the nascent flicker of authentic movement. This initial messiness is an intrinsic and valid component of the transformative process. It signals that the shell is indeed beginning to fracture, and that the emotions it has so assiduously contained are stirring from their slumber. The action itself, however chaotic it may initially feel, represents a decisive departure from the stasis of confinement. This leads us to a pivotal realization: the act of breaking free is not a passive occurrence that happens to us. It is an active endeavor that we undertake. Our emotional shells were not spontaneously generated. They were meticulously constructed through learned behaviors, through experiences that instilled in us the necessity of self-protection in specific ways. Because they are learned, they are also amenable to being unlearned. This process necessitates deliberate and sustained practice, much like the acquisition of a new skill or the mastery of a foreign tongue. We must consciously elect to cultivate new patterns of thought, feeling, and action that gently challenge the established boundaries of our shells. What then does this intentional practice entail? It involves the consistent selection of actions that extend slightly beyond our immediate comfort zone, actions that our shell has perpetually cautioned us against. If your shell is fortified by an aversion to conflict, your intentional practice might involve the gradual cultivation of expressing a minor disagreement in a context of low personal stakes. If your shell is designed to conceal your authentic sentiments, your practice might consist of divulging a small, genuine emotion to a trusted confidant. These are not grand pronouncements designed for public consumption, but rather small, repeatable actions that, over time, forge new neural pathways within your mind and heart. A vital element of this deliberate practice is the courageous embrace of vulnerability. We often perceive vulnerability as a deficiency, a precarious opening through which hurt can penetrate. Our shells are engineered with the express purpose of shielding us from this perceived peril. But what if we were to reframe this perception? What if vulnerability is not an indication of weakness, but rather the profound courage to allow ourselves to be truly seen? It is the very gateway to authenticity and the creation of genuine connection. When we permit ourselves a measure of vulnerability, when we dare to articulate a feeling or confess a need, we are taking a small yet profoundly significant step in eroding the shell's defenses. Consider the moments immediately following that initial, uninhibited cry. The ensuing confusion can be a period of profound vulnerability. Instead of retreating back into the comforting silence, what if we learned to sit with that sensation? What if we viewed it not as evidence of a misstep, but as an invaluable opportunity for deeper self-understanding? Small acts of vulnerability, such as articulating, "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed at the moment," or "I'm not entirely sure how to navigate this situation," can initiate the dismantling of the shell's formidable walls. They are akin to minuscule fissures that permit the ingress of the illuminating light of connection and comprehension. This gradual process of exposing ourselves to that which the shell has assiduously protected us from is often referred to as incremental exposure. It is not a matter of plunging headlong into the unfathomable depths of the emotional ocean. It is about tentatively testing the waters, then wading a little further and perhaps eventually swimming a short distance. It is about executing controlled, manageable steps that fortify our resilience and bolster our confidence. If your shell is constructed around the avoidance of social engagement, your incremental exposure might commence with the simple act of making eye contact with a stranger, followed by a brief, polite greeting, and then perhaps a short, introductory conversation. Each step, regardless of its perceived insignificance, represents a triumph over the shell's restrictive confines. As we embark upon this transformative journey of active engagement, it is imperative to acknowledge the indispensable role of self-compassion. We are, after all, endeavoring to unlearn deeply entrenched patterns of behavior. There will inevitably be moments when we falter. We might utter words we later regret, or regress into our familiar habits. We may experience a surge of doubt, questioning whether any genuine progress is being made. In such instances, harsh self-recrimination will only serve to reinforce the shell's dominion. Instead, we must extend to ourselves the same grace and understanding we would readily offer a cherished friend navigating similar challenges. Self-compassion serves as the bedrock upon which our sustained efforts are built. When we err, rather than subjecting ourselves to punitive judgment, we can acknowledge the misstep with gentleness. "This is challenging. I did not handle that perfectly, and that is acceptable. I am in the process of learning." This compassionate approach empowers us to glean wisdom from our setbacks without abandoning the pursuit of our goals. It serves as a potent reminder that progress is rarely a linear trajectory, and that every experience, even those fraught with difficulty, can ultimately become a wellspring of personal growth. Now, let us delve more deeply into addressing those crucial inquiries regarding how to truly initiate action and how to ascertain if we are achieving genuine advancement. What are the tangible, observable actions a reader can take today to begin challenging their emotional shell, even if those actions feel small or insignificant? The inherent beauty of commencing any endeavor lies in its liberation from the necessity of elaborate stratagems or profound sacrifices. It is about identifying those small, quotidian moments that allow us to gently prod against the shell's resistance. One of the most accessible actions is simply to pause and observe. When you detect the familiar impulse to withdraw, to assent when your inner voice urges dissent, or to conceal your true feelings, simply pause for a single, deliberate breath. Within that brief interlude, pose the question, "What am I experiencing in this precise moment?" You are not obligated to act upon the answer. The mere act of noticing is sufficient. This practice of mindful awareness constitutes a potent initial step in recognizing the shell's presence and its pervasive influence. Another tangible action involves the deliberate practice of saying, "I don't know." Many shells are constructed around the imperative to project an image of competence or unwavering control. The admission of not possessing all the answers can feel like an act of vulnerability, yet it is also profoundly liberating. Begin in situations where the stakes are minimal. When someone solicits your opinion on a matter about which you are uncertain, endeavor to respond with, "That's an excellent question. I'm not entirely sure about that at the moment." This unassuming phrase possesses the capacity to gradually loosen the grip of the incessant need for absolute certainty. Consider the practice of documenting a single feeling each day. It need not be an emotion of profound depth or complexity. It could be as simple as frustrated, weary, hopeful, or slightly apprehensive. You may record it in a private journal, a note on your mobile device, or even on a fleeting scrap of paper. The very act of naming an emotion, even if you do not immediately explore its nuances, is an affirmation of your inner landscape. This is a direct challenge to those shells that advocate for emotional suppression. If your shell is characterized by an avoidance of genuine connection, a small yet significant action could be to offer a sincere compliment to another individual. It might pertain to their attire, their diligent effort on a particular project, or an act of kindness they have recently performed. This outward focus, when delivered with unfeigned sincerity, can foster a brief, positive connection that bypasses the shell's customary barriers. It is a subtle, yet effective, method of reaching out. Finally, grant yourself a moment of quiet contemplation regarding something that has brought you pleasure. It could be the melody of a song, the tranquility of a walk in nature, or the simple enjoyment of a warm beverage. Dedicate a mere 60 seconds to truly savor that experience and acknowledge the pleasure it affords. This practice of appreciating small joys is an act of self-nurturing that many shells endeavor to suppress, as it implies a focus on internal well-being rather than external defenses. These actions may appear diminutive, but they are concrete, observable, and each serves to gently question the self-imposed limitations of your shell. How can readers distinguish between genuine progress in dismantling their shell and mere superficial adjustments that reinforce it? What are the internal indicators of authentic change versus continued defense? This is a question of paramount importance, as it is remarkably easy to deceive ourselves into believing we are transforming, when in reality, we are merely refining the shell's external facade. Authentic progress in dismantling a shell is characterized by a discernible shift in your internal experience, rather than a mere alteration in outward behavior. A key indicator of genuine transformation is a diminution of internal anxiety or dread when confronting situations that previously triggered your shell's defenses. If you are practicing the act of speaking up, and you observe that the knot in your stomach has lessened, or that your racing thoughts have quieted, that is a clear sign of authentic advancement. If, however, you continue to experience the same intensity of fear, but are merely compelling yourself to speak regardless, that may represent a more superficial adjustment. You are pushing through the shell, but not necessarily weakening its underlying structure. Another significant indicator is an enhanced sense of ease and authenticity in your interactions. When you articulate a feeling or express a need, and it feels less like a carefully rehearsed performance and more like a natural extension of your true self, that is indicative of authentic change. If you are articulating the correct phrases but still feel as though you are wearing a mask, or that your expressions lack sincerity, then the shell likely remains firmly in place, perhaps merely adorned with a more polished veneer. Pay close attention to your emotional responses in the aftermath of an interaction. If you have ventured beyond the confines of your shell, and you experience a sense of profound relief, a quiet contentment, or even a gentle feeling of accomplishment, these are unequivocally positive indicators. Conversely, if, after taking that step, you are assailed by a surge of guilt, shame, or an overwhelming urge to undo what you have done, it suggests that the shell's defenses remain robust and are actively attempting to draw you back into their protective embrace. Consider your level of self-judgment. As you experiment with new behaviors, do you find yourself becoming more forgiving of your occasional missteps? Or are you still subjecting yourself to harsh criticism, viewing any deviation from perceived perfection as irrefutable proof of your inadequacy? The genuine dismantling of a shell often coincides with an increased capacity for self-compassion. If you continue to berate yourself for every minor lapse, it is highly probable that the shell's internal critic remains firmly in command. Finally, seek to identify a growing sense of inner freedom and spaciousness. When a shell is intact, life can feel constricting, predictable, and often rather monotonous. As the shell begins to yield, you may perceive new possibilities unfolding, a greater sense of spontaneity emerging, and a feeling of breathing more freely. This is not contingent upon a radical transformation of external circumstances, but rather a profound enrichment and expansion of your internal experience of existence. If you are merely going through the motions of change without this underlying shift in your internal landscape, it may signify a superficial adjustment. The act of initiating change is an endeavor demanding considerable courage. It requires unwavering patience, persistent effort, and a deep reservoir of self-kindness. Remember that each incremental step you take, each moment you consciously choose to be a fraction more open, a touch more authentic, constitutes a significant victory. It stands as a testament to your inherent strength and your burgeoning desire for a life lived unfettered by silence. As we commence our journey of action, conclusion, recall the nascent tremor of that silent scream, not an auditory ripple, but an internal convulsion. For an age, you have moved through the world swathed in a carapace, a testament to your fortitude, yet perhaps also a quiet monument to your confinement. These emotional bulwarks, meticulously constructed over years, perhaps 52 years, built layer by protective layer, served as your bulwark. They deflected the biting gales of judgment and the lacerating barbs of overwhelming sentiment from breaching your core. Yet, as our exploration has revealed, these very defenses, once vital, can transmute into gilded cages. They mute your authentic resonance, attenuate your incandescent hues, and leave you adrift in a sea of bewilderment, isolation, and a profound estrangement from your own self. You have traversed these pages, not as a detached spectator, but as an intrepid cartographer of your own inner terrain. You have grappled with the disquietude, the raw vulnerability, and the unvarnished truths that lie veiled beneath the surface. Merely by your presence here, by the turning of these leaves, you have already embarked upon the inaugural, most pivotal stride. You have begun to fracture the shell. The modalities we have considered are not rigid dictums, but gentle overtures, invitations to chart a divergent course, to consciously deconstruct the ramparts you once perceived as your sole sanctuary. We have apprehended that the shattering of the shell signifies not an erasure, but a metamorphosis. It is the acquiescence to the tender tendrils of your authentic essence to emerge, unhindered by the ossified strictures of the past. This odyssey necessitates a deliberate vigilance regarding the reinforcement of the shell, a tender self-compassion for the phobias that fuel its construction, and the valiant vulnerability to permit yourself to be genuinely perceived and acknowledged. It is the embrace of the inherent discomfort that accompanies authentic communion, the understanding that genuine connection flourishes in the open expanses, not behind impenetrable fortifications. You possess the very key to this emancipation. The disorientation that may have ensued from that initial, visceral release of emotion is an augury that the ancestral edifices are in flux. It is an intrinsic facet of the unfolding, a disorienting yet indispensable transition as you establish your equilibrium in a more candid, unvarnished mode of existence. Existence beyond the shell is not a receding mirage, but a palpable reality poised for embrace. Envision a cosmos where your sentiments are not a wellspring of ignominy or apprehension, but a luxuriant tapestry of the human condition. Picture the buoyant lightness that accrues from shedding the onerous burden of unspoken words and unarticulated feelings. Contemplate the crystalline clarity that dawns when your internal landscape harmonizes with your external expression, engendering a profound sense of integration and serenity. This is the recompense for dismantling those ingrained defenses. It is the liberty to forge profound connections with others, to articulate your voracious thoughts and sentiments without the distorting filter of presumed expectations, and to experience the exhilarating effervescence of authentic belonging. This is not a terminus, but a nascent beginning. The pilgrimage of shedding your shell is a perpetual unfolding and lifelong commitment to inhabiting a life resonant with your most profound self. In the Lacanee where your shell once stood, you will discover not and void, but a fertile panorama of genuine connection, profound self-apprehension, and the exhilarating liberation to simply be. The trajectory ahead may still be punctuated by moments of trepidation, yet you no longer navigate it in solitude or in silence. You have unearthed your voice, and with it, the potency to sculpt your own narrative. Continue to cultivate the awareness, the self-compassion, and the fortitude we have espoused. When the familiar impulse to retreat behind a fortified bastion arises, pause. Recount the resilience you have already evinced. Seek out kindred spirits who comprehend and champion your journey, perhaps discovering others who, like you, are learning to unfurl. May you persist in embracing the courage requisite to be seen, to be heard, and to inhabit a life unburdened by the oppressive weight of silence. The world awaits the full spectrum of your authentic voice. Proceed, unfurl, and let your true voice resonate. The journey of shattering the shell is the journey of rediscovering yourself.